and I'm sure you're familiar with that particular event. Regrettably, this is not going to be the talk that stops the nation. So if you've sort of come here thinking that it might be something that really does stop the nation, I've got to say you're in for a little bit of disappointment. So if I can let you down very gently. Notwithstanding that, the topic that we want to look at is, I think, a very important topic. It's important regardless of whether we look at it from a spiritual or from a secular sense. And what I want to do tonight is I certainly want to take away some scriptural principles with regards to time, but I also want to look at it from a secular sense as well. Because I think it's fair to say that for all of us, one of the real challenges that we face is that we are always busy, we seem to run out of time, but we'd like to be more productive. So what I want to do tonight is I want to emphasise the importance of time, certainly as far as disciples are concerned, but I also, as I say, I want to take it into the secular sphere and start to look at ways whereby we might be able to just sort of be a little bit more focused when it comes to time. So I am going to look, as I say, at things from a spiritual side, but I'm also equally going to put into our consideration some slides and some concepts that I would share in a workplace training type arrangement. So hopefully you'll see there's a bit of a fusion of ideas. I think, though, that the concepts, even though some of the concepts might be sort of, in a sense, work-related, and I look at the average age of those who are here and there's not too many workers, but nevertheless, the principles we can take away regardless. I think all of us, even if we're not working, all of us still have some focus. We still have some activities that we want to achieve, and so I think we'll certainly see some benefits in that particular way. Perhaps to get our proceedings underway, I think this just really frames very nicely this notion of the importance of time. And this is a quote by Brother Bob Lloyd. And I'm sure most of you will have heard of Brother Bob, and he wrote that little seminal book, Minute Meditations. You know, in a sense, there's a reflection on time. Brother Bob had that book, and he largely said, hey, if you've got a minute, here's just something that you can reflect upon. And again, we're not going to plumb all of the depths behind what Brother Bob is stating here. Really what I want to say is that I think succinctly he pulls together what the essence of discipleship is all about. The essence of discipleship is all about worshipping God. The essence of discipleship is all about finding time to develop a relationship with the Father. The essence of discipleship is all about, you know, looking and considering what would Jesus do, and then to sort of follow in those particular footsteps. So I think in a sense this frames very nicely what we want to speak about tonight, the importance of trying to find time for God, and that's something that we're going to address very, very shortly. Before we do, I just want to remind us that we are all potential millionaires. Now, not literally in the dollars and cents aspect of being a millionaire, but something that is of far more importance than money, and that is time. When you think about it, time is our most valuable resource. And that's acknowledged by many. You know, secular writers will speak about the importance of time. For many of us, you know, if you've got $100 or $1,000, you can spend that, and if you're working or you've got superannuation, you'll get the bank account topped up. When your time's gone, your time has gone. And so the time that we devote tonight, the hour that we devote tonight, that's gone. And whatever you do tomorrow, assuming you're here and you're breathing, whatever you do, that day is gone. And once that time is gone, it's not as though we can suddenly try and replenish that particular time. But I just sort of, look, I love numbers. As most of you will know, I'm an accountant. And so when I sort of looked at it, you talk about 83 years. What does that actually mean? Well, ultimately what it means is 43 million minutes on average. That's based on the average life expectancy of 83 years. So for some of us in the room, we're sort of getting towards the end, and we're probably fairly close to the 42 million minutes or thereabouts. Some of us are sort of at maybe at that halfway point or a little over. But whatever our situation is, all of us have got time. And really what we're focusing on tonight then is, what are the choices that you're going to make with your time? That's really the situation that we're considering tonight. We're all blessed with time. What's the choice that you do with your time? Now, for some of our time, there's probably not a lot that we can actually do. There's 27 years of sleeping on average that we've got there. So that's largely, when we sort of look at that continuum of time, there's a huge chunk that's automatically taken up when you're sleeping. Not a lot that can happen at that particular point. 20 years on average of solid working, and by that sort of is all the amalgam of that particular time if it was stacked up neatly. 7 years in the bathroom, although I'd venture to say, based on certain family members, it might be a little longer than 7 years, but that's statistically what we're told. 6 years of eating, and certainly there's a few brethren that I know who have been in a good paddock, and I'm probably thinking they've had more than the equivalent of 6 years. Think about this: 5 years of waiting in a line, 3 years in meetings, and with the introduction of Zoom, let me just tell you that number's probably going higher and higher, because people think that all of a sudden, let's just have a Zoom meeting, and people talk about it as though there's some novelty that's attached. To be perfectly honest, I'm sort of a little bit zoomed out. What about 6 months of sitting at red lights? You know, if somebody said to you when you're going to get a licence that you're going to spend 6 months of your life sitting at red lights, who would have sign up and say, yes, I want to be driving? And so 6 months tying your shoes. So hence I wear boots so that I don't have laces. I've sort of redeemed just a little bit of time. I joke a little bit there. But the reason I've sort of put this up to just disaggregate in a sense is to just indicate where our life can suddenly go. And some of these activities, I'm not saying they're not important, but some of these activities, we do them, and certainly if you're sleeping, well, there's not much else you're doing if you're sleeping. So it is about extracting out of the time that we're awake. How can we extract the most out of that particular time? That's really the essence of what we want to look at. So I think questions are always good, and in asking these questions of yourself, I'm asking these questions equally of myself as well. And again, some of these have got some overlap with what we've looked at, but if I could pick up on the third question down, how much time do you spend in prayer a day? There's a question that I think all of us would do well to ponder as to how much, and perhaps if you're like me, your prayer life might sort of go up and down as far as that goes. But it's still, I think, it's a telling question to ponder. How much time do you spend reading the Bible per day? And again, I'm not sort of putting myself out here and say, listen, I do 6 chapters per day from the Robert Roberts reading chart. I'm not going to say that, and I can't hand on heart say that. But again, it's just pure reflection. And in a sense, I'm not wanting this to be a legalistic sort of, I tick the box and, Lord, this is what I do every single day. Because it's not so much about how much time we spend reading the Bible per se, it's how much the Bible has actually influenced our lives. That's really what it comes down to. Yeah, how much of a manifestation of those principles are they when people see us? But I think nevertheless, what you'd see when you sort of look at those questions, they start to have, I think, some relevance for all of us. And in our own lives, we can start to perhaps sort of just reflect, where does our time go? How much time do we waste per day? What's interesting is that I kept a log of my time a couple of years ago. So from when I woke up to when I went to bed, I basically, for 15-minute intervals, I sort of kept just a bit of an idea as to where my time went. The scary thing about it was just I thought I was busy, but I wasn't necessarily productive, and the amount of time that I wasted, it just blew me away. If somebody had said to me, "Are you a busy person?" I'd say, absolutely. But then when you sort of look at all these blocks of time that you've got where you're really doing very, very little. So I think that's really what I want people to start to think about, is to appreciate that all of us are given time. But what are we actually doing with that particular time? I guess we always talk about finding time. You know, I'd love to find time, and that's just one of those expressions that we have, that we talk about finding time as if somehow, sort of, if I was to pull up under here, I might sort of get some extra time. That's just not going to happen. What we're doing with our lives, that's the time, and it's the allocation, and it's the, I guess, the way we sort of do things. That's where our time is being spent. And I consciously emphasise that our time is being spent. It's not a case that we can suddenly find time somewhere, much the same as we might find other resources. Time is a precious resource, but it's different to most other resources that we will have. And I think on that particular point, Brother Andrew Bramhill, so Brother Andrew, as I'm sure you're aware, is the editor of the Christadelphian magazine. And in an editorial a couple of years ago, Brother Andrew made this astute comment. He says, "Never before has time seemed so precious while apparently in such short supply." And again, I think there's an amount of wisdom that Brother Andrew has been able to just put together into that particular quote. Increasingly, many of us say we're time poor. I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do whatever. And we are always blaming a lack of time, as if suddenly, you know, in the 21st century, we went from 168 hours of time to all of a sudden somebody had shaved off 20 hours. We've always had the same amount of time. It really does come down to what we're actually doing with that time. And I think you'll relate to this as much as I did when I first saw this quote by Brother Andrew, that we do think, if only I had more time. How many times have you said that? I just need more time, if I had more time. But the reality is, we don't necessarily have more time. What we actually need to do is to be using that God-given time as wisely as we possibly can. And so hence the relevance, I think, of this particular question. Are you making time for God in your life? I think if I was to flip that around, and if I was to ask you and say, are you making time for yourself in your life? Most of us, I think, would be able to assent to that. Absolutely. There are hobbies, there are things that I like to do. There's perhaps a little bit of internet surfing, there's the odd TV show, and I like to do a whole run. And I'm not saying that any of those things are wrong in themselves. Not judging anybody as to what you're doing with your time. But I think that the key question is, are you making time for God in your life? And here's the other thing to think about as well, and this is part of this whole notion of redeeming the time. Some of the activities that we do can also involve God at the same time, things that we find enjoyable. You know, if it's out in nature and we enjoy that and we can look at the wisdom of creation, there's a complementary. So doing things that we enjoy and also making time for God, they need not be mutually exclusive. And really what I'd like to suggest is that what we need to try and do is to find some mutually inclusive, so that there are times where we can enjoy ourselves and yet we can reflect upon the goodness of God in our lives. But as I say, to me, I look at that question. It's a question that I like to ask myself on a regular basis. Am I making time for God in my life? Because here's just a snapshot of my life. Snapshot of my life on a given work day will be work consumes a certain amount. There's some preparation and other things that go in. And then I might sort of say, oh, look, I've just had a terribly hard day. I better sit down, I better watch a bit of television and unwind. So I'm being totally transparent. This is how things might go in my life. Then I finish that and it's sort of getting a bit late. I might think, oh, I might just do a quick reading. And generally, when's that quick reading done? And let's say I read a New Testament chapter of the Scriptures. It's often not at the most productive point in my life. It's often done as, if I can say, just almost a little bit of a bolt on that I think, oh, look, I might just frame myself before I go to bed. I might just quickly have a little flick through. And as Joe will say, I don't do that every single night of the week anyway. But at different times, what I'm actually saying in my life, and this is why what I'm actually speaking to you about is something that I need to hear. And that is that too often we don't always prioritise our relationship with God. You know, if we're going on a trip or we love fishing or there's a whole raft of things that we can actually do. Too often, if it's involved in those sorts of activities, you know, bang, we can extend the amount of time that we're awake, we're suddenly enthused. But if somebody suddenly says, oh, let's do a couple of chapters of the Bible, maybe we might be nodding off. But again, look, each one will ask themselves that question, are you making time for God in your life? Because when it's all said and done, that's really the whole duty of man, our duty in a sense. And the privilege that we've got is to know God. Our relationship should be such that we actually want to extend our life with God. You know, that's what eternity is all about. Eternity is all about, it's all about spending time with God and Christ and brothers and sisters. Interesting, just sort of tangential thought, if I can just share this with you. I guess if I was to ask you, what are you looking forward to in the kingdom? Maybe I'll ask that question. What are you looking forward to in the kingdom? No wrong answers here. What are you looking forward to in the kingdom? Seeing Jesus' face. Now that's really great, Maureen. Seeing Jesus' face, that's really great. That's a fantastic answer. What else? You've almost got the correct answer straight away. So, and I always get disappointed. You sort of hope that you'll build up to the correct answer. But Maureen is really, in a sense, you've almost hit that bullseye, Maureen. What else are we looking for? Let's just broaden the conversation.
Meeting other believers from previous times.
Absolutely, meeting other believers. Yes, that's exactly right. Terrific. What else?
Seeing peace in the world.
Seeing peace, absolutely. Yep, peace and righteousness. Yeah, righteousness, then peace, absolutely. What else? Spending time with Moses, absolutely. There'll be quite a crowd, I think, wanting to spend time with Moses, absolutely. And we could extend that with other worthies, David and others. What else are we looking forward to?
Experiencing amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's something we look forward to, and particularly as you start to get a little older and you start to realise that the sands of time through the hourglass are starting to sort of shift to the bottom half, and there's not much sand in the top, and you reflect upon what you could do a decade ago or 20 years ago, and you look at what you can do today, then yeah, amazing energy. What else?
Never making another mistake.
Yeah, and that's, when you think about it, just the importance of that. And yeah, we know the challenge, the difficulties, you know, the good that I would, I do not. And Yeah, that's also important as well. What else? Leon, you're normally pretty good for an idea. What do you reckon, mate?
What do I reckon?
What are you looking forward to in the kingdom? Anything?
Seeing loved ones.
Yeah, and that's really powerful, isn't it? And in fact, that can sort of spur us on and give us encouragement. So that's really, really positive. Really, really positive.
Always depends on what you relate to, really. In that regard, anyway.
It does. And you know what? You said a powerful word. It's what you relate to. You've really started to sort of focus. It's what you relate to. So for Maureen, it's relating to Jesus, isn't it? Yeah, that's what it's all about. Interestingly, I thought some of us might also speak about, and there's nothing wrong with this, think about the lovely words of Revelation 21 and verse 5. You know, no more sorrow, nor sighing, nor death. The former things will have passed away. Behold, I make or create all things new. Think about that. So there's going to be a complete rejuvenation, a complete regeneration. That's a wonderful thought. Now, as I say, all of those ideas are great. It's interesting, Paul, when he was sort of asked that, Paul's idea, and this is where Maureen sort of almost nailed it straight away, what Paul wanted was to be with Christ. There was nothing about any of the other peripherals that we might talk about and that we might sort of say are parts of the joy. Paul actually wanted to be with Christ. That was what he wanted. That summed up what the kingdom was going to be like, that he was going to be with Christ for eternity. And as I say, Maureen sort of said she wants to see the face of Jesus. And in a sense, that's really as his disciples. I'm sure all of us. And there's nothing wrong with sort of, as I say, starting to sort of build a greater montage of some of the other benefits. But ultimately it is about the relationship that we are developing with Christ and with the Father. So hence, if that's the cornerstone, if that's what it's all about, and that's what we want to sort of frame eternity, I think that becomes a powerful question that we want to ask ourselves. Now, Ephesians 5 and at verse 16 is, of course, where we selected the title for tonight. And what I actually thought was just having a look at Ephesians 5:16, just the various translations, just a number of ones that we'll see, because I think in a sense this helps us to unpack this notion of redeeming the time. What does that actually mean when we speak about redeeming the time? Now, I guess for many of us who have been in the truth, we understand what that means, but I do think that just sort of putting it into simple everyday language starts to help to define what we mean by redeeming the time. The best use of, making the most of every chance, the most of every opportunity, recognising and taking advantage of every opportunity. And I do like the Amplified where it says using it with wisdom and diligence. And we're going to finalise our discussions tonight by drawing upon those particular thoughts from Psalm 90, this notion of wisdom. But as I say, I thought just by looking at a number of different translations, even though they're centred on the same, you'd expect them to almost be telling us an identical arrangement, I think there is sort of just a little bit more that we can unpack from that particular phrase of what it means to redeem the time. And of course, when we speak about redeeming the time, this is not some sort of one-off transaction that you suddenly say, look, I'll redeem this. But the real challenge is that it requires continual effort and exertion. It'd be nice if, like in many things in life, there's a one-off and you do it and that's it. But in the case of redeeming time, this is an ongoing process. So in a sense, if I could just use that metaphor, we set the clock today and we look for ways that we can redeem the time. And then when tomorrow rolls around, we start the whole activity all over again. But what does it actually mean? What's in simple terms, when we speak about redeeming the time, what does that actually mean? What does it actually mean? So if I ask you that question, redeeming the time, okay, it's making the most of every opportunity. What does that actually really mean, though? Not wasting it. Yes, that's in one area, John, I'd say yes. And we can waste time. You know, we opened up, and at different times I waste time by just surfing through Facebook. And other people will lose time on social media or something along those lines. So wasting is an integral part. I think there's something else as well. What does it also mean if we're redeeming the time? What by implication does it? Sorry, Stephen? We get the time back. Yeah, redeeming the time is almost as though you're trying to get it back, although once time passes, but in a sense what we're trying to do is to move the hands back. Yeah.
Doing something godly with the time.
That is important, absolutely. So it's doing something godly, as we said before, when some of our activities, we shouldn't necessarily sort of put them into boxes and sort of say, well, this is the God box and this is the me box. In a sense, we're trying to have a degree of inclusivity. In fact, there should be, thinking of those good old Venn diagrams, there should be almost very, very strong overlap that takes place. Yeah, I think that's right, Paul. What else do you think?
Making time.
Sorry?
Make it profitable.
Make it profitable, absolutely. That's a great phrase, and being an accountant, we generally like to talk in terms of profits and debits and credits. Yeah, I love that phrase, it was credited to him for righteousness. Yeah, that really resonates with me. Debits and credits, yes. Sorry, Clive, you were going to... Profitable?
Yeah, making the time count, that's what Clive said.
Yeah, absolutely. It is about making time count. Absolutely. Being intentional. So, no, I like that, Lisa. What you're saying is it's making a conscious decision, isn't it? So in other words, it's not just sort of sitting back and before you know it, and how many times have you done this? Here's what I've done. I've sat down, I enjoy sport. And I've thought to myself at different times, I might just watch an over or two. I've got other work I need to do. I'll just watch an over or two. Obviously we're talking cricket. Just watch an over or two. And before you know it, 20 overs has gone by. Or you've watched the whole match and you thought, I was only just going to do that for 5 minutes. It's about a conscious decision of what matters most. That's really what should be what we're looking at. But one of the other points too is that sometimes we have to take time away from one activity. And that's in a sense what I'm alluding to. To sit down and watch some cricket, I can probably afford that. But do I have enough time that I can watch sort of umpteen World Cup matches against some teams that are going to do pretty pathetically poorly? The answer to that is that there's probably better uses of my time. And again, not judging anybody else who finds that time, but based on what I've got to do in my life, is that the best possible use of my time? And often what we actually do need to do is we have to sort of just assess what's important to me. Where do I want to invest my time? Again, good accountancy type arrangement. Where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck? Is that going to lead to things that are profitable? Is it going to lead to things that are eternal? Or is it just a case of I can just kick back and disengage and just enjoy myself? So again, these are all the questions. And please, I'm not judging anybody here, seriously. I judge myself, and I've given you some insights into the fact that time management isn't always what it should be. I teach this, and yet I still struggle with the issue of allocating time in appropriate areas. I think in a sense, really what I'm trying to also get a coalescence of ideas around is this idea. If I was to ask every single person here, are you busy? I'm sure everybody would say they're busy. Yeah? Jonathan, you're busy? Yeah, absolutely. Is there anybody who's not busy?
Well, we've got to do everything to the best of intentions.
What we do, Leon, that's exactly right. Lynn's not busy. You're not busy? Okay, well, I'll drop around. I did bring the ironing with me. I'll drop that around, and you live pretty close by. That's fantastic, Lynn. I really appreciate that. No, I think deep down you will be busy. You've lost the iron? Good thing I brought my spare iron with me. He doesn't know where the iron is? Oh, well, there you go. I think, though, I think, to be perfectly honest, you are busy, Lynn. Yeah, you're busy here knitting. You're making the most. See, here's sort of Lynn's making the most of the opportunity. You can listen, and you can also knit. I'm assuming it's knitting. What are you knitting, Lynn? Oh, that's very, very nice. See, there's in a sense a redemption of time. You can sit and you can listen to me because what I'm speaking about isn't that deep and meaningful. And at the same time, you can just sort of knit and away you go. To me, that is just an excellent example of a duplication. But I want to just look at this particular matrix. Has anybody seen something like this before? It's urgency and importance. People have seen this. I guess it goes by a couple of names. It goes by the name of the Eisenhower matrix. So named, of course, after the president of the US, Dwight Eisenhower. But it was largely Stephen Covey. And I'm sure most of us will have heard of Stephen Covey. It was largely Stephen Covey who took this Eisenhower matrix out of a bit of obscurity, packaged it up into a couple of his books, you know, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and What Matters Most. And he started to make us think about this notion of urgency and importance. And one of the things that emerges when we start to look at this particular matrix is, and again, look, some of this you might look at and say, oh, it's a little bit on the secular side. The quadrant of quality is where all of us, all the time, should be operating. But too often, we get caught up with this quadrant of waste. That's what happens, and sometimes there's the quadrant of deception. So last night, a brother phoned me up to sort of speak about giving some money to the ACBM. And, you know, an hour and a half later, I got off the phone and I sort of said, oh, it was an hour and a half. Now, and look, generosity is very nice, and we are in need of bequests, so please take that the right way. But in saying that, all I'm saying is sometimes we can get caught up thinking that we are busy. But a lot of that is non-productive work. Whereas really what we should be doing is, as I say, it's not urgent. When you think about it, some of the things that we look at, it's not urgent, but yet it's important. And that's really one of the areas. Think about what Jesus said in Matthew 25 when he was sort of giving that parable about sheep and goats. And he sort of speaks about the individuals who found time to go and do certain things. You're familiar, I'm sure, with Matthew 25. And of course, you know, when there's this sort of bifurcation takes place, sheep, goats, etc., you know, of course, the sheep say, oh, look, when did we see you? And of course, Jesus does make mention of the fact that in that you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. But they found time to visit those in prison. They found time to address needs for clothing and for food. They found that time and the effort and the energy. And I guess that's really what I want to say, is that sometimes some of those activities, when we think about it, we all wish we would do it and could do it, but how often do we actually do it? Yeah, we often think, oh, I should do whatever. And then, of course, the moment passes, and often it's a case too, we move on to other things, or we say, look, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that when I get a little bit more time. I just don't have the time now. So this is really what I'm saying, is that quadrant of quality, when often it's a case, things that are important often just get pushed to one side. They get crowded out by the urgent noise that we've got. What does that actually mean? And I think this is a powerful quote that I've got here from Stephen Covey. And when you think about this now, he was not writing this for Christadelphians or disciples of Christ. He was just writing this in a secular sense. And he says, anything less than a conscious commitment to the important is an unconscious commitment to the unimportant. What does that actually mean? Well, basically it means that we've got to make decisions. If you don't make the decision that, hey, that's important, I'm going to do it, and if you just let the time lapse and you do nothing, then really what you're actually doing is you're giving commitment to those things that are unimportant. Think about in our own lives, what is important? What's important? Now, there's a number of things I'm sure that we could sort of stack up and say that are important. Yeah, becoming more like Jesus, a bit of fruit of the Spirit type stuff. It's tough. Now, there's nothing easy about the fruit of the Spirit. Anybody who thinks it's easy, I'd love to have a chat with you. You know, there's a couple of areas where I struggle on, big time. And sometimes those sorts of issues, we tend to think, well, do you know what? The best day to work on the fruit of the Spirit is Friday. I'm going to hold off until Friday because that's the best day of the week to work on the fruit of the Spirit. I'm going to devote all day Friday to the fruit of the Spirit. And of course, guess what happens when Friday rolls around? Well, it suddenly becomes the following Friday, etc. What Stephen Covey is saying is that you've got to, in a sense, put a line in the sand. You've actually got to commit. You've actually got to commit and say, this is important to me. If it's important to me, then I'm going to do something about it. If you don't do anything about it, well, guess what happens? Time just passes by and you get caught up with the minutiae of life. You get caught up with this is urgent, it's got to happen today, and we've got to do this and we've got to do that. And the things that are perhaps the big rocks, and I'll focus on that very shortly, the big rocks in our life, the tangible things that are really important to us. If we don't watch out, those things can somehow be pushed to one side. So, very quickly, oh, sorry, John.
Could I just say that I find I can always find time to do the things I really like doing. And the things I don't like doing get pushed aside. So.
You'll do them tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. From memory, John, you like fishing.
No.
Oh, you don't?
Boats, but not fishing.
Oh, you like boats. You like boats, but you don't like fishing. Okay. So, assuming the weather was going to be very nice tomorrow, I don't think it is, but Saturday's going to be very nice weather, 25 degrees. Assuming the weather was nice, then you'd love to be out boating. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. And if you could be boating 6 days a week, if the weather was fine, you'd be sort of probably happy with that. I hear what you're saying. All of us have got the equivalent of I like boating in our lives, or are things that we enjoy doing. And really what I'm trying to say, I'm not saying that there's no boating, I'm not saying there's no cricket, I'm not trying to sort of put a list of these are the things you can't do and you don't ever go to the Adelaide Oval or anything like that. All I'm just saying is what we need to do is we need to put into a context and say what is really important in our lives. What am I actually doing? Am I developing that relationship with the Father? Remember, a lot of those events need not be mutually exclusive. You know, God and Christ can be with us in those particular avenues. Very quickly, I want to look at 5 time management strategies. Now, these are strategies that ordinarily I would share with businesses as to how they could sort of amp up and to extract a little bit more focus perhaps out of their people. So some of these, when you look at it, you might sort of say, oh, that doesn't really relate to me. Now, that's fine. Remember, there's 5. All I'm going to ask you is to try and find one thing that you can look at, that you can latch onto and say, here's something that I could do. Some of you might find more than one. If you can, all power to you. But if you can't, I'd be very surprised. I think there's going to be something here that you'll be able to latch onto. The first thing I want to say is we need to start the day with a clear focus. What do you actually want to achieve? And I think this becomes important even if you are retired and you've got all the time in the world, so to speak. What is it that you want to actually achieve for the day? And by having a clear focus, that of course enables us to frame the day with obviously ensuring that God and Christ are part of that day. What can we do as far as a little bit of self-improvement? What are the goals that I want to set? And so, again, I see that as really important. Now, I'm not going to drill down on all of that. In a business sense, I'd start to sort of say, here's what this actually means if you're starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, that you're ready to hit the ground running, shall we say. But I think without a doubt for most of us, just to have some focus, how can we frame the day? What can we anchor the day around? What's this day going to be, so that when I reflect at the end of a day, and I think this is powerful, when I reflect at the end of the day, what can I say that I've done in this day? What can I say? If I look back on this day, what could I say with gratitude that this day has brought me? So that's the first one. It's all about starting the day with clear focus. The good old task list. Note this, it's not necessarily a to-do list. Now, why have I said a task list per se? And it's different to a to-do list. Often to-do lists become wish lists, and people look at it and sort of say, to do tomorrow, to do Friday, to do next Monday or whatever. But a task list starts to become just a little bit more focused. Note this, it's the orange words there, must do. So what's vital? Do you have a list on a day-by-day basis that you would say, hey, this is what I actually want to do? This is a must-do for today. Now, again, I appreciate for some who are retired, every day might very well be a day where you've sort of got, in a sense, a blank canvas and you're able to sort of make choices. But is there something that you could actually focus and sort of say, well, hey, this is really what I want to do. This is part of what I'm going to do. You know, what's important? Often, as I say, we get caught up with the urgent. And things happen around the house, and urgency sometimes takes over. Taps aren't working, or whatever happens, and you get waylaid. But if you could think of one thing that you know would make a difference in your relationship with the Father, and I think all of us can think about at least one thing. What's that one thing? And could you work on that tomorrow? Could you frame your day and sort of say, well, hey, here's a day I'm going to focus. This is what I'm going to do. And this is going to be my in a sense, my task list. I know I need to sort of work on this particular activity. And that's, of course, where our next step is. And that is to focus on high-value activities. Now, again, this can have various meanings depending, of course, on the audience. But I think if we were to look on high-value activities, for the audience here, the context for us, a high-value activity, I would have to say, is all about relationship building with God and Christ. It's all about discipleship activities. They're the high-value activities, yeah? That if you wanted to sort of just really hone in, you wanted to really focus, what are the high-value activities? Remember, our commitment when we got baptised was, it was a commitment to Christ, that Christ would come first. So again, whilst this does talk about what do my clients or my team need most from me right now, maybe that could be in a sense reframed, and sort of in a sense we could say, what does my ecclesia? What do my close friends, my close brothers and sisters, what do they need from me right now? All of us have got good friends in the truth. What will create the biggest problem if it doesn't get done? And I'd suggest that working on human nature. If we don't try to make some changes, if we don't try to grow in grace, if we don't try to develop a level of humility, if we don't appreciate what God has done for us, then in a sense that's a big problem for us. What's the biggest contribution I can make right now? There's something to think about. What's the biggest contribution? And again, let's just focus it on ecclesially, or your family, or personal growth. There's three areas that you could sort of start to look at. What is the biggest contribution that you could make right now? Again, I won't focus on the final one there, the strategic tasks. Again, that's probably got more of a work-based focus. I don't know whether you've seen this sort of arrangement before, where you sort of have something like a mason jar. And what you actually have is you have sort of some sand, and then you have sort of some little larger pebbly, rocky sort of type stuff. Then you have some big rocks. And the reality is, and you can see there what each of those represent. And again, this is drawn from Stephen Covey's work. Just imagine the jar if you put the sand in first. You know, the sand might take up sort of a couple of inches on the bottom of the jar, yeah? Everyone can appreciate what will happen there. Then if we were to put sort of the little pebbly rocks in, we pop those on top. Then if we try and shove the big rocks in, the big rocks are the important things of our life. We're not going to get them all into the jar, are we? And this is where, if you look at things from a slightly different paradigm, let's just imagine we did the big rocks first. Put the big rocks. What's important? If you put the big rocks into the jar first, what do you then do around those? So the big rocks become what's important, what I want to focus on. Well, with all of these little experiments, what you can actually determine is you can then throw all the sand and all the gravel, and that just sits in around those big rocks. And of course, the point taken here is that what we should do with our life is to say, what's the big rocks? What are the important things in my life? I want to make certain that that's something that I focus on first of all. Because too often, most of us get caught up with sand, and we get caught up with little pebbly stuff. You know, the incidentals to life. And then all of a sudden, what are we trying to do? We're trying to shove in the big rocks. Remember what I said? It's sort of getting on towards 10 o'clock of the night time, and all of a sudden I think, oh, I better just do a reading. I might just read this or whatever. What really is the situation that we should be saying, what matters most? What matters most? And what matters most is the big rocks in our life. And the big rock in our life is, of course, Christ. So is Christ in there first, and then we're shaking everything else around us. Again, look, you can do some little searches on YouTube, and you can sort of see just the impact of what it is. We think we can only get so much in. If you start with the big rocks first, you can get everything in. If you go the other way around and you put the sand in and then the other stuff, then there's no time for everything else. And finally, there's the good old procrastination. And great book, Eat That Frog. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know that I'd want to eat frogs. The frog legs, I am not sort of remotely interested in eating. But for most of us, and again, the analogy that's being presented is something that we just don't want to do. And the author of this book, this is actually quite a good book. It's Brian Tracy is the author of this book. And one of the big things he says with procrastination, and I think for all of us when it comes to time management, procrastination is right up there. Let's be honest, we're always going to do something tomorrow or next week. And if you wanted to go on a diet, well, you can only start diets on a Monday morning. And if you're off the wagon by Tuesday, well, you can't sort of get back on the wagon on Tuesday or Wednesday. You've got to wait to the following Monday before you get back onto the diet. And so we procrastinate. We're going to do it. You know, the old woulda, coulda, shoulda type arrangement. So the whole idea is what we need to do is to commit. That's really what it's all about. We need to commit to the task. Get rid of the excuses. You know, are there things that you'd like to do and want to do and you tend to sort of put off? You know, if we're appreciative of the time that God has given us, hey, it's about commitment. Commit to it, start the project, get underway. Again, I won't go all the way through, but accountability. Accountability is where it is at. And that's the glue, as I said, that ties commitment to results. And accountability, in a sense, week by week when we meet on a Sunday, there's a degree of accountability when we come here to remember our Lord. There's some accountability that comes. We reflect upon the week. So it's important for us to do it. And of course, daily review. We open the day by saying, hey, I want it to be a focused day. And towards the end, a couple of minutes at the end of the day, just to sort of say, hey, what actually happened? What did I achieve? Am I happy with the results? If I am, hey, that's great. If not, why not? What's it really doing? What it's actually saying to us is that our time, our life means something to us. We're not just going to let it just sort of flow past like a river. But what we actually want to do is we want to make some meaningful change. And in a sense, when we speak about redeeming the time, that is all about making meaningful changes in our lives. And so that brings us to our final slide. We're not going to look at Psalm 90, but Psalm 90 gives us a reflection on time. And I certainly think verses 9 to 12 are powerful verses, and they cause us just to reflect. The psalmist says, "For all our days pass away under your wrath." The psalmist was reflecting upon the wilderness wanderings. And so he was sort of looking back at that particular point in time. And it was rather arduous going through the wilderness. We bring our years to end with a sigh. And for many people, that is the case, that they do bring their years to end with a sigh. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. And whilst that might appear to be a very negative aspect or view on life, I think for many of us, if we do reflect, there is a lot of toil and trouble. Hopefully there's some good times as well that we can reflect upon. But there is a lot of toil and trouble, because in a sense, this is the day and age in which we live. The curse is ever with us. It's prevalent in our lives. And so the psalmist says, our days, they're here, then they're gone. James speaks about our life. He says it's sort of like a vapour. You turn the kettle on and there's this little steam that's here, and, the kettle automatically cuts off, and that's the end of the vapour. That's the end of the steam. That's, in a sense, how James depicts, similar sentiments. And it's the final words, and this is the issue that I said with respect to wisdom, which links back to Ephesians 5 and at verse 16, which the Amplified Bible actually drew upon, and that is, and this is what the psalmist's words are, and these are the words that I really think are powerful for all of us. Teach us to number our days. Again, great accounting term, numbering, I love it. Number our days. In other words, respect the days that we've got, that we may get a heart of wisdom. That's what it's all about, that we may get a heart of wisdom. And of course, the wisdom that we're talking about is a wisdom that is God-centred and God-focused. That's really, when you boil down what life is, our life needs to be a life that is God-centred and God-focused.